Yeah, it's nice to be here with all of you. I'm excited to hear that there's this growing and developing solidarity economy network in Virginia. That is super cool and so exciting to hear. So whatever U.S. Solidarity Economy Network, whatever VASEN can do to help to support that in any way, we're totally happy to do that. So, you know what? Before I even start talking about anything, I would just love to hear what questions or what are the areas that have generated any heat or a lot of like disagreements, or just like that's really exciting, or I don't get that, or I'd really love to learn more about that. That would, for me, be really a great place to start, so that I can kind of shape what I would talk about, or our discussion. Is that okay? So I wonder if we can just go this way, and maybe start with you, Matthew.
Yeah. So limits of things and opportunities. So there's definitely been this tension in the network too about, and I'm coming from an academic background, so I could talk things to death. But this whole desire to like act and learn has been a thing. And I think we do need to start thinking about, how what we're talking about translates into kind of like on the ground work. It's also been a tension is that we're a network of people who have never been in a room together. We're still getting to know each other, building some relationships, and knowing that that's so important. So that's something that's been on my mind, is like, how do we build relationships across these individuals that are working in various places?
Great, thank you. I'm going to go this way. So PG?
Yes, well, I guess a latent implicit tension. I see you're from UMass Amherst. I'm from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Got in at the very beginning of what is now known as MMP. So reconciling some of that, being able to talk across that, different perspectives of coming at things, that's been something that we've been gently, very slowly trying to broach.
Can I just ask you a follow-up?
Sure.
What kind of differences? What have the points of tension been? Maybe the major. Yeah.
I think, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, that we've been pretty successful at avoiding tension or friction, and but the place where there's an opportunity for a dialogue across paradigms is talking about the nature of state power and the role of understanding money as a unit of account, rather than the way many coming from a Marxian perspective do as a commodity, how that changes how we see policy space. And that brings us from the UMKC side to job guarantee, that we see having pretty substantial success with Ayanna Pressley's resolution just now. And then the kind of work that you're describing, that you do, coming from the cooperatives perspective and talking about labor and democracy in the workplace. How are those two going to meet? And those two camps academically have been standing across from each other. We here haven't experienced that as friction, but rather as a diversity of potential on the table.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Yeah, I live in Loudoun County, which is kind of an exurb of Washington, D.C. And I have found this network just within the last few months. I haven't noticed any tension in this group. I feel like I'm still new to it, but my personal orientation towards this is, as a person who really doesn't, I'm not planning on staying in Virginia. And so I don't think there's going to be any tension for me. I want to support the people in whatever way I can, because I'm going to have time within the next year, but after that, we're probably going to move to Maine. And so what I want to do is learn what I can do when I get either to Maine or New Brunswick, Canada. We haven't chosen where we're going to stay. My roots, I grew up in New Brunswick, Canada. And so I'm interested in land trusts. I'm interested in working with the Indigenous people in Maine and New Brunswick. And so that's kind of where I am personally. And I just want to know where this group is going and how I can help, because I have time in the next year. So that's
Cool.
where I'm coming from. Yeah.
Cool. Lindsay?
Hi. Yeah, one thing I've been thinking about a lot, and this might be a different version of what Matthew said, but I work with a lot of organizations across the Appalachian region and beyond. And I do feel like we get kind of in this loop of talking about solidarity economics, and we talk about that it's something we support, but then especially organizationally, a lot of the organizations I work with might not be working on a particular project. And so it's kind of hard to make it concrete if we're not, for example, actively building a co-op. But I hear a lot of people, communities, and organizationally saying we want to support infrastructure around solidarity economics, but it doesn't quite feel tangible. And I don't know if that's a language barrier that we're using terms without saying specifically what we mean. And I also see us saying, well, do we need to work on policy to lay the foundation to make these things happen? And so I just would love to hear a little more about how to move kind of as we're learning, what actions can we be taking? Do we have to have particular policies in place, or can we support solidarity economics without specific projects? Does that make sense?
Great
Okay.
questions. Yeah. Olivia?
I agree with everything else everybody else has said, and wonder if you have any case studies or examples of how other statewide networks have developed and moved along. Like, what do they do? What did they do in their first year? What have they done many years in? Just trying to understand what other, we all live in such different places and do such different things. How other statewide networks develop and what they do. Thank you.
Great, thanks. That will be an easy one. There aren't any others than Massachusetts. Yeah. Daniel?
Yeah, I would again echo everything that everyone has said. But for me specifically, I 100% agree with what Lindsay said and how she put it, which I think there is kind of, if there's tension, it's simply because we all know that we have limited bandwidth. And if you're here in this conversation, then you are committed to the work and you're probably doing a lot of incredible work, for your 9-to-5 job or in addition to your 9-to-5 job. And so then finding ways to integrate that into our work lives, integrate that into our personal lives, and then, finding, I think for me personally, it's a way to then intentionally make more time for it. I think that we have such an incredible collection of people that are, in this group, but aren't necessarily always able to be at the table. because they're doing such amazing work outside of this, in addition to it. And I think getting to a place, as Lindsay said, as Olivia just said, where we can really make it tangible and take those action steps together would just be very beneficial. But I also, to an extent, fall into the thought process that Matthew brought up, which is there's still such a tremendous opportunity for us all to learn and build those relationships, which is more, it's not going to have those like easy action items where we can kind of organize around it, but rather it just takes time being together, which has obviously been strained by the pandemic that we're currently trying to get ourselves out of. So yes to what everyone said, essentially.
Wow, that is so rich. Just great points and great questions. Yeah, so let's see where to start. I would start by encouraging you to think about using the phrase solidarity economy as opposed to economics. So economics is the study of the economy, and the economy is what we all are part of, right? So Matthew mentioned that I've been a member of the Center for Popular Economics for over 30 years. And for almost 10 years of that, I was a director, but I was always a very, very active member. So I've spent a huge amount of my life trying to help people understand how the economy works. And so economics, yeah, it's great to understand how the economy works. And I think there is a way in which economics, the study of economics, is deliberately obfuscated by the academy and by economists. And it's a power grab. And don't be fooled by it. Okay, if you obfuscate it and you make people feel like, oh, economics, it's so complicated and all those graphs and equations and models, I can't understand it, then you feel like, okay, I'll just leave it to the so-called experts. And that's a really bad idea, right? Because the economy, the actual economy that we all live and breathe and are part of it, that's a social creation. That's something that we all are part of, and we live it every day. Whether it's in our job or in our community or in our family, no matter what it is, it's impacted by our economic system, by our economy. And as a social construction, right, that we're all part of, we all know pieces of it. We have some expertise in it because we live it. And we all have some ability and I think responsibility to change it if it is not meeting our collective needs as well as the needs of the planet, which I think I don't think we'll have any disagreement there, right? It's the economy as we know it is not meeting people's needs. It's not meeting Mother Earth's needs, right? So I would encourage you to think about the economy, solidarity economy, and not economics. I mean, fine if you want to think about solidarity economics too, but I would encourage you to use the phrase solidarity economy, because that is all these practices, right? I guess, so much of what you all have talked about, like concerns about learning versus these actually building what I refer to as practices, a whole set of practices that would align with solidarity economy values. That tension, right? Like not doing enough, or it's not concrete enough, it's not tangible enough. I would encourage you really, really, really to think about everything that you're doing that aligns with solidarity economy, to count that as being active in the movement to build a solidarity economy. So whether you're really thinking, oh, I'm doing solidarity economy because I'm taking care of my kids, or I'm taking care of my parents, or I'm doing something for a neighbor, right? All of this non-monetized, unwaged activity, or I'm doing some mutual aid in my community, or I'm producing for myself through my garden, right? All of that is valuable economic activity that the mainstream economy doesn't recognize because it's not monetized. But the solidarity economy recognizes all of that as valuable economic activity, because if you paid somebody to install that garden and take care of it, if you paid somebody to take care of your kids, or your parents, or the neighbor had to hire somebody to take care of them, or whatever it might be, then it would become like legitimate economic activity. So for solidarity economy, we don't make that distinction. So even learning about solidarity economy is part of being part of the solidarity economy, because how can you be part and help other people understand and see opportunities and see linkages unless you sort of have an understanding of what the solidarity economy is? So I think all of you, I am absolutely sure, are already doing things that are part of solidarity economy, and understanding the framework enough to, as Matthew said, like put on those glasses, open your eyes, see it, is one step to just affirming, yeah, I am part of this, and this is affirming. I think that's really, really important. And I really, really think it's important to honor all that, because sometimes people say things to me like, oh, you're doing so much and I don't do anything. And I'm like, look, I know you are a really kind and good person. That is part of solidarity economy, how we live in this world, how we treat each other, having compassion, being generous, gifting, supporting, reciprocity, cooperation, mutualism, right? When you behave like that, right? That's all part of where we're trying to get, right? To who we are as human beings. That's all part of solidarity economy. And so if you're not building a co-op, or you're not building a community land trust, or you're not organizing participatory budgeting, or a local currency, or a time trade, or, I mean, all these are possible, and it's all stuff that's possible to do anywhere, right? So whether you move to Maine or you stay in Virginia, these are all models that are adaptable wherever you go. So there's lots and lots and lots of practices, lots. And some are like big undertaking, right? So my day job is I am a co-op developer. I mean, it's slow and hard work, right? So we've been at it sort of for 10 years, and we have now 7 co-ops in our network, worker co-ops in our network, 2 of which, bless you, are still in the startup phase. And altogether, how many jobs? I don't know, not that many. On the scale of things, the number of years we've been at it, the amount of money that we've put towards this initiative, not only for the nonprofit, but for those businesses, like it's not a lot to show. It's really slow, hard work. So I certainly wouldn't be expecting everybody to go around building co-ops, right? But there are all kinds of, like, everything from just embracing solidarity economy. So if you teach, or if you belong to an organization, if you have a newsletter or a blog, or or you're in a meeting and you mention solidarity economy, I think that's important. It's like an echo chamber, and people who don't know what solidarity economy is will be like, what is that? And you have an opportunity to say, this is what it is. And I find often people respond really well, even people who they're not in that world at all, right? They're not about social change. They're not about changing the world or changing our system. But it resonates a lot, I think, because people do know now, given like all these multiple convergent crises, right? People know that something's wrong and they're looking for alternatives. Let's see. I'm just looking at what else. Yeah, building relationships is important, but you know, you are doing it. And even if it's on Zoom, you're building relationships, right? It might not be as fun, or, you know, there are advantages to being able to meet face to face, but you're doing it.
So empowering to hear you kind of say these things back to us. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And yeah, and saying like name it in your newsletter, and you know, those little steps. Like I can already think of kind of a list of places that, oh yeah, I could talk about this more, even if I don't feel like an expert. Maybe it would open up dialogue. So really appreciate that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It sparks that curiosity. And I think also, like, you don't have to be an expert. It's like, oh, I'm just learning about it. This is my understanding. Maybe it's not perfect. Maybe it's not entire, right? Like, but I'm just learning about it. And this is what excites me. You know, like, it's a good conversation to have. Yeah. So I feel like I've touched on a lot of things. I think, PG, your comment, I'm trying to figure out if, let me ask you if this is maybe, this is the way I heard it. So I don't know if this is right. So like the role of the state, money, like the role of money, democratic workplaces versus traditional workplaces. I mean, what I'm hearing there, and correct me if I'm wrong, I definitely might be projecting, but I hear maybe the tension around talking about capitalism versus post-capitalism. Is that, am I on the right track at all, or did you mean something completely different?
Well, it is a path. It's a path where problems sometimes manifest. I might put it as talking about post-capitalism without fully having analyzed capitalism.
Right.
And so kind of trying to jump past where the material conditions are now, which can sometimes be a problem when you shoot for the next step.
Right. Yeah. I talk about this a lot. And when we do our Solidarity Economy 101, I don't know if anybody besides Matthew tuned into any of them. We've done it a couple times. So you might remember that we do a thing on, here's what capitalism is. Here's a simple definition. And here's why it's really important to know what the difference is, to have some clarity about capitalism and post-capitalism and where solidarity economy sits within that. So that is an area that I encourage y'all to take a look at and try to get clear about what is capitalism. You don't need to be an expert like somebody who's studied, you know, who's an economist, right? But the basics of what is capitalism and what is post-capitalism. I mean, I will say that a big piece of it is around ownership and control, right? Particularly ownership and control of the means of production. So the MOPS, as we sometimes call it, the means of production, which are the things that you need to produce. It's your factory, it's your land, it's your tools, it's your inputs, right? Your equipment, right? That's what the capitalist owns, right? And then there are the workers, that's the wage labor. And the workers do not own the means of production, and they don't get to call the shots. The capitalist gets to call the shots. So right there you have class conflict, right? And so just to take the example of a worker cooperative, the workers are the owner, right? So you don't have this class divide. So for a business, that's often where you can see clearly, right? You can see clearly whether it's a capitalist mode of production or a non-capitalist mode of production. And if it's some kind of a collective ownership, a cooperative ownership, that would align with solidarity economy. So I do think some of that stuff is important. I know for sure there's a lot of fear about talking about capitalism because people are afraid that it'll get it'll get bloody, it'll get ugly. And even, I mean, this fear of conflict, I really hope that we can flip that on its head and see potential conflicts and tensions as an opportunity to better understand each other, to have clarity, to kind of, debate it out, even if it means like some kind of duking it out, right? Like, and you don't have to agree, you need to be respectful. So I don't agree with people that believe that we can reform capitalism to get to that better world. Totally don't agree. But I can respect those people and I can work with those people. I know they're often trying to get to the same place, right? A better, more just, more possible, I don't know, democracy is often a dividing line, but a more just and sustainable world. And there comes a point where we might be at odds, but right now things are so bad, right? There's so many crises that we're facing, multiple crises that we're facing, that we need to work together as much as we can. And once we get close enough, maybe we have some choices to make. But in the meantime, we just need to be doing whatever we can. But at the same time, I'm very invested in where I'm going to put my energy is not in socially responsible capitalist businesses, but I'm going to put my time and energy into solidarity economy practices. So I hope that touched on that. I feel like
you really hit an important point. Not to interrupt, but you really hit something. I'm talking about flipping the fear of conflict on its head, because that fear has been very real, and culturally here, especially in the Shenandoah Valley in this part of Western Virginia, that's a really big thing. And it is an energy that has been used to break solidarity, whether it's been in labor unions, and we have a very long and very particular history with the so-called National Right to Work Coalition Committee being centered very, very close to here and having a lot of unrecognized influence. So we get all sorts of right libertarian influences that are latent and unexamined that come from actual union busting, from actual breaking solidarity. And it goes back even before that to the time when we experimented with democracy here on this soil during the readjuster movement. The thing that finally broke that up was incited appearance of conflict, which led a lot of the allies pull back from the coalition. So we have a long history on this soil.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely. One of the things, so on a big picture level, one of the things that I think is really nice about solidarity economy is that one of its principles, one of the values, core values, is pluralism, which means that it's not a one size fits all model. It's not, we don't have a blueprint. We don't have all the answers. There are many paths to our goal, right? And, in the words of the Zapatistas, a world in which many worlds fit. So right there, it's easier to have a civil discussion with somebody that you have differences with. You can be humble and say, this is what I believe, but I'm not going to say, oh, you're an idiot, you believe that, right? It's a really different attitude. And just on the specific kind of divide and rule, it's one of the reasons why I think capitalism will never get us there, right? Because first of all, there's that class tension, right? The capitalists are trying to maximize profits, and often on the backs of workers, and the workers are trying to get a better and a fairer shake, right? That inevitable clash, right? One of the tools that the capitalist uses is divide and rule along race, along culture, along gender, you name it, right? Immigrants, right? That kind of divide and rule is absolutely fundamental to helping capitalism work. Because otherwise, if people really came together, like realizing as workers how exploited they are and how so many decisions are destructive for the workers and for communities and for society, the world, right, at large. And if we came together, that's a really dangerous thing for the system. That's a really dangerous thing for capitalism and capitalists. And so there's constantly trying to look for any kind of fracture to divide and rule. And over and over and over again, exactly that history that you're referring to, whatever they can use, they do. That's how they, that's how you maintain power in part. Right? Yeah. So I know that the last thing that I didn't talk about yet is just statewide networks. Is it okay to jump to that, and is there any other follow on from stuff I talked about so far?
I kind of have a question, Emily, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I'm just thinking about business owners, like even small business owners. Would you say that entrepreneurialism fits into the solidarity economy, right? Like small businesses?
Yeah. So I think there's a difference between, so a lot of times entrepreneurialism, it depends what you mean. Some people, it's defined in different ways. To me, it's just that kind of energy, that commitment, that grit, that drive to hang in there, start up your own business, do that research, do that. I mean, yeah, it's a lot, right? It's a lot of pieces. And if it's one person, it's a lot that entrepreneur has to hold and stay motivated, and then has a workforce and motivate the workforce and organize production and all that kind of stuff, right? So that's, to me, what entrepreneurship is. It's like creativity and drive and imagination and inspiring. There is nothing wrong with that. And there is nothing, I don't feel like there's anything at odds with entrepreneurship, that kind of drive and energy and vision that's in conflict with solidarity economy. Yeah. Here's the question. What are you doing with that entrepreneurship, right? Are you creating a capitalist small business, or are you creating a business where the workers have ownership too? So I know that there are lots of small businesses, and I'm not throwing stones at those entrepreneurs, those capitalists at all, right? There's a lot. They treat their workers well. They have respect for the earth. They pay them well. They give them good benefits. Maybe they probably even give them a certain amount of decision-making power, right? It's teamwork and it's consultative, and that's all great. And that's almost close to a co-op, right? If they're really integrating some decision-making power with the workers, right? The rub is, at the end of the day, that structure is legally in the hands of the owner, right? And not the workers, right? So it's sort of noblesse oblige, right? It's by the grace of the owner that workers have that power. And if that business is bought out by somebody else, or a different manager is put in place, that can all be just taken away. And so the difference with a co-op is that that is baked in, right? The co-op, by definition, means that the workers are the owners, and they have that either direct control, or they have at least indirect control, in that they elect the board, and the board, they have some control over management, whoever the management is. So that's really the difference. I don't see that there's any problem with entrepreneurship.
What I'm trying to think about is how to communicate, because I agree with everything that you said, and I love everything about the solidarity economy. And when I think about having these kinds of conversations with people that I know that own businesses and think that they are totally win-win, and that they are a good force in society, and also their workers would agree with them, right? The workers would also agree. So how do you, like, that is the thing, like, how do you communicate that actually it's not win-win? You know, like, it's not good for everybody, this system that we have.
I wouldn't challenge people like that.
Okay.
I think, they probably, for them, it is in the short run, as long as they're doing their good thing, it probably is win-win, and that's fine. And if we really felt like capitalism by and large was characterized by those kind of businesses, maybe that would be okay. But my argument as an economist is that capitalism will never be that. Like once upon a time, maybe in Adam Smith's time, it was dominated by small business. We're way beyond that, right? Like look at the dominant forces. That's the dynamic, right?
Okay.
So there can be small businesses that are doing really great things, but and I think they should be recognized for the good things that they're doing. But they also should take a step back and think about the system as a whole. And some people think that if we just have enough of those really great socially and environmentally conscious businesses, that those are the people that believe that we can reform capitalism. And who knows, maybe they're right. I don't believe it.
Okay.
Yeah, but I wouldn't particularly throw stones at those people. There are a lot of those kind of people that already are sort of ethically aligned, pretty well aligned, right? That are maybe that are selling to their workers, right? It might be while they're still younger and still in the business, and they stay on. So in our neck of the woods, we have a really successful fermented, like real pickles. They do fermented vegetables. So that was a conversion, and the owners were pretty young, and they've stayed on. They're still there, right? They got bought out, but they still work there as a worker owner, just like everybody else. And then there's a big push for conversions of small business owners that are of the boomer generation. So part of what's referred to as the silver tsunami that's upon us, right? Like I can't remember what percentage of small businesses are owned by people who are basically retirement age, but it's the majority. And a lot of them don't have a succession plan. And they sort of think, oh, I'm just gonna advertise, like looking for somebody to buy my business, and they're really overly optimistic. And so there's a whole movement, and there's funding for helping people consider the option of selling to their workers. So that's definitely pretty big these days. And an opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful.
Good. So I'll talk a little bit about VASEN, a little bit about USN. I don't know how much y'all know. So US Solidarity Economy Network started in 2007. I was part of a group that created a track at the first US Social Forum in Atlanta around solidarity economy. So nobody at that time was almost nobody was talking about solidarity economy, but we looked at people that were working in sectors of solidarity economy. So we had worker co-ops, we had credit unions, we had community land trusts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we organized a track, but we also organized a couple of meetings. And out of those meetings, we agreed that it would be good to create a network just to keep us connected. And so I was at the Center for Popular Economics at the time, and we agreed to serve as the sort of anchor. So I was able to actually, I was allowed to use some of my staff time at CPE to do this Solidarity Economy Network work. So that was 2007. Solidarity Economy Network to this day, like for a while, we were able to get a little bit of grant money that paid for my time at my portion of CPE work, where I was doing USN work, but it was really a small amount of money, and it was a small amount of my time. So USN has always really been a network connecting, right? Not trying to build co-ops, not trying to do any of that on the ground stuff. But because of that work is happening in all different sectors, and we were more about just trying to connect up these pieces, spread the word. So educational work, we did some convenings, we published a couple compilations of essays coming out of our convenings, that kind of stuff, raise the profile, raise engagement, try to get the existing pieces of the solidarity economy to connect with each other. We're still a volunteer organization. We did finally become a nonprofit, like officially become a nonprofit, but we basically, people give us money every once in a while. But we're really volunteers. So for better or worse, one of the nice things about that is that there's not a whole lot of ego involved in terms of like, we don't have to report to the funders. We don't have to fit in the funders' little box. And so like this process that we've been doing for a year that we call Resist and Build, of bringing together all these national organizations that are engaged in one way or another in system change, right? And some of them are about reforming capitalism. Some of them are full on solidarity economy. All of them, at least some of the people in their circle, are engaged in like post-capitalist work. But something like Common Future, if you know them, they're most of their folks are about reforming capitalism. So we've been trying to move this process, this national process of one, getting clear about capitalism, post-capitalism, two, proving that we can have a civil and constructive conversation about this, three, getting clear about strategies to move forward, and I guess four is learn to work together by working together, where we're trying to create something that's jointly owned. So it's not a SEN project, it's not a democracy collaborative project, it's something that we're co-creating. That's still a process. I would say SEN is still at the heart of it, but it's getting better. We're getting other organizations to step into leadership more and more. So that's SEN. Mass SEN started officially 2 years ago. But we've been meeting over the course of many years, including one of the national solidarity economy convenings was at UMass in Amherst. So we have a history of bringing together folks working in all these different sectors across the state. And it's a progressive state, so there's a lot of stuff going on and there's a lot of stuff to connect. The new thing that happened 2 years ago is we brought up, for those of you who might know Cooperation Jackson, we brought up Kalia Kuno from Cooperation Jackson to talk about this joined up strategy that we put under the umbrella of Resist and Build. So if you think of solidarity economy as the build, actually building these practices, then the Resist is the grassroots organizing and the social movements, which Cooperation Jackson is doing, and the electoral political strategy, which Cooperation Jackson is doing. So they're doing all three, right? They're building solidarity economy, they're organizing at the grassroots level, and they're engaging in electoral political that sphere as well as policy, right? And so that we wanted to bring him up to give us a nudge in Massachusetts to think about how can solidarity economy make those connections or raise the awareness that these are important connections to have a joined up strategy. So then out of that meeting, that was 3 years ago that we brought Kali from Cooperation Jackson up. And then the next year when we had a statewide convening, there was some work that happened in between. But the next year we officially formed the Massachusetts Solidarity Economy Network. We used that time of that convening, it was a 2-day conference, to build some working groups, some of which really, they just kind of floundered and didn't happen. Others have been very active, and some are sort of in between. So we let it be kind of organic, like who has energy to hold this down, right? And always we're hoping that we're building on stuff that people are already doing, and connecting it up. So that was 2 years ago we formed. So yeah, we have a number of working groups, education, mapping, the whole co-op development thing is its own network, right? Because there's so much there in Massachusetts, but we consider ourselves sister organizations. We were birthed at the same time, and we often plan together. And there's a huge overlap in the people participating. So co-ops, and I'm blanking on something, but anyway, it gives you a sense of the kind of stuff that we're up to. Yeah, so I'll stop there. And I don't know, are we out of time to go to 6?
We usually go a little bit longer, so usually.
Yeah, so happy to hear from y'all and where you are at, and yeah, like I said, any way that we can be helpful.
So here's something that I see in what you've just described. That's again, I think a place with potential. You described, again, we've kind of brought up a recurring theme of capitalism, post-capitalism. And one way to deal with that is reforming capitalism versus going to post-capitalism. But that's still not quite where I am. I'm seeing a potentially fruitful gap in analyzing currently existing capitalism, radically analyzing currently existing capitalism, or either of those discussions. And I've looked a little bit at the center's the Center for Popular Economics, at their your educational material, and there are some significant bits missing. I would hope that we could get into dialogue with modern monetary theory, MMT, the UMKC school of economics, radical analysis of capitalism, starting from Keynes and starting from Veblen and the original institutionalists, in dialogue with the Marxian threads. Because where we stand right now, to make it really concrete, we have concepts out there like the notion that banks lend reserves. It's a very popular idea among solidarity economy folks that I've talked to, that banks lend reserves. And that gives rise to all kinds of thinking about how you fund or finance projects. And it's based on a fundamentally contested notion of how banks actually work. It also obfuscates to some extent and maybe helps to explain some of the lack of scaling or lack of success of complementary currencies, because they're rooted in a certain way of looking at the currency. That's one very concrete example. Another is that the federal government, the government of a country like the United States or Australia or Japan, taxes and borrows in order to spend. That's a very fundamental thing. Starting from that starting point, on the one hand, leaves the state off the table. And this is a problem that Marx ran into. Things were supposed to happen over hundreds of years. It didn't happen. The state was remarkably resilient compared to what the immense firepower Marx was able to bring to these questions. The rise of money manager capitalism was not adequately analyzed there. And if we'll come back then to trying to do an economics curriculum on that pillar, we end up importing neoclassical assumptions as much as we hate to, if we leave that part unchallenged. And there's more, but those are already fundamental issues, and they're not exactly fringe at this moment. They were fringe 20 years ago, but they're now shaping the context in which we act. So I think that having that dialogue, having that discussion, bringing that to the table, I think has great possibility, great potential.
Yeah, I mean, there are many areas of dialogue and exploration, and many areas that are under theorized for solidarity economy. I do think some of those debates are happening in academic circles, and the trick is how to for non-economists or people, there are other disciplines that really dive into this stuff as well, but how to make it something that it really feels relevant. Yeah. So
That's the thing.
yeah, that's a challenge, right? Yeah.
Emily, one thing I wanted to ask is, like, I have this assumption that there's these cultural differences between Virginia and Massachusetts. And I was like, oh yeah, like Massachusetts just has this culture of, I mean, it's cooperatives and whatever. And the more I think about it, the more I'm realizing, well, I think, can I go back to Pody's point from earlier on? I think just in Virginia, we've had more overt challenge, like more overt efforts to kind of to initiate a right to work law and those different things. And those been, I actually, the more I look around, the more I realize I think there are, I mean, you read Jessica Nembart's book, The Collective Courage, and you realize that there has been cooperative efforts going on in Virginia for a long time. And so I guess one of the questions I have is how do we like both recognize that history? I mean, does that play a role in the work that goes on with VASEN? And then how do we, like, especially in Virginia, I mean, as you can see, like, I think everybody on this call is white. We do have some, there's a group of I mean, people are doing work. This is probably why they're not here, is they're actually doing the work in the communities, people of color. And so, like, how do we, I mean, ways that we need to really think about ways where we're building those relationships and building that trust. Again, recognizing we're doing it in the time of COVID, and that's a difficult thing to do. But I was curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. Recognizing the history is really important, not to just, well, first of all, just to keep hammering away that solidarity economy is far more than co-ops, right? Because if all you're doing is looking for co-ops, you might not find a lot in your state. I don't really know, but you'll find lots of other examples of probably, or even co-ops that were not constituted as such, right? So you need to look at informal practices, right? If they're not legally incorporated, right? Nonetheless, that's how human beings survive, is through cooperation, especially hard pressed communities, right? That are low income, that are oppressed, etc. They survive through cooperation. So that's the thing. And how do you recognize that history? I mean, yeah, I mean, maybe there is in your mapping, I imagine you're probably collecting stories too, right? And so bring that forward, right? What kind of solidarity economy stuff are you digging up that's not recognized even as being like economic activity, but it was all kinds of ways in which people help each other out, or they share things, or they give things, gifting, any kind of common spaces, right? That's maybe democratically run. I also like to point out, and there is some difference, right? Like there are folks who use a solidarity economy framework who would be anarchists, and they're like, we don't want, we don't want anything to do with the state, right? But me, I feel like this, so this is just my take on it. I don't see the state like up and withering away anytime soon. And so in the meantime, some of those public institutions and policies, I think, are keepers, like public schools. I think it's a keeper. National parks, public libraries, some of the regulations, health and safety, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think they're keepers. We'll have to have that debate because a lot of the public sector is really, you know, it's all serving the big corporations and the capitalists. It's been hijacked, but the potential is there for it to serve the people, serve the common good. So that's very mainstream, very mainstream. It's all around us, right? Like, so that's the national government, that's your state government, that's your city government, your municipal, right? All of these things are collective processes. And so all of that can be, you know, you can engage in. Yeah, and, you know, all along the way, it can be reformist or it can be transformational, and it depends what your end goal is. So for example, the fight for 15, what progressive would argue with that? Nobody would argue with that. That seems like a great thing. But if you're operating within just a capitalist framework, and once you achieve that $15 minimum wage, and then it's like, yay, let's just celebrate, that's reformist. But if you see that as a living wage is a necessary stepping stone towards a different post-capitalist solidarity economy where people can afford to meet their needs, then that's transformative, right? That's a non-reformist reform, right? So it really matters what you're aiming for. And it's another reason why it's important to have some clarity about what is capitalism and what is post-capitalism. The other thing I'll say about recognizing history is we need more people doing what Jessica did, right? And she says this, right? We need people doing this for different cultures and different ethnic groups, and you know, there's a rich history, and also localities, right? So you probably could dig up, right? If you had somebody that wanted to do the research, right? There's probably a rich history in your state, I'm sure. So yeah, somebody needs to do that research and write about it. In terms of diversity, yeah, it can be challenging. Sometimes, like, especially if you lead with certain things, it's kind of sometimes seen as a white thing, right? So food co-ops, I know that there are exemptions, but a lot of times, you know, a food co-op is sort of seen as the thin wedge of gentrification, and sometimes that's true. Not that there's that intention, but just it's a signifier, right? A food co-op is a signifier, like, okay, this community is kind of like this, and then you start seeing other people moving in. Co-ops can be that way too, even though there is a growing number of co-ops where most of the people are people of color, and or like cooperative home care associates, where these were mostly, almost all women who have been on some kind of public assistance program, right? So there's a perception about solidarity economy. I think we're really working hard to say that this isn't true. And some of the areas where it's strongest are in communities of color. In Massachusetts, yeah, certainly Boston. Well, I would say the organizations that are leading the charge with solidarity economy are base building organizations. So they're community organizations, they have membership, they're building that membership and that social movement community base of power. So we're really lucky in that way. But and those are the groups that have come together. So Yeah. But that's been years in the making, right? Like in the Boston area, there was this Solidarity Economy Initiative where there was funding to bring together. I think they started off with maybe, I'm not sure, maybe 6 base building organizations that really were being led by people of color, to engage, explore, learn about solidarity economy. So that happens, that started years ago. So by the time we formed Solidarity Economy Network, right, there were a lot of these base building organizations that were pretty primed to be part of it. But it's a process. It's a process. Yeah. Any other thoughts or, yeah. I'm excited that y'all are doing this, and it's just great. And I hope that you know, Massachusetts and Virginia will be an inspiration for other states to try to make these connections. And yeah, it's just great.
Just one last question or thought. We talked about one of our next steps being some sort of mapping activity,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you mentioned that at VASEN you have a mapping working group. So I wonder if you have any projects or examples that you could share that you all have done.
Yeah, so first of all, I don't know if you have seen the US Solidarity Economy map. There's a national map.
Okay.
Okay, so this national map, right? We got National Science Foundation money to do this. It was not just SEN. There were a bunch of academics that engaged in that. It was like a 2 or 3 year project. So there was a whole bunch of research and GIS analysis and like a deep dive into Philadelphia and New York, that I wasn't part of any of that. I was mostly involved in the map that we built out. So that's been long in the making, and no sooner had we built it than we realized, oh my goodness, there are so many glitches. Like, we built the platform from scratch. And there are so many glitches that we've spent years. We finally got some money to hire an IT co-op to help us fix the glitches. I think, I don't know, it's up and down. I feel like we've come a long way. Although the very last time I looked, it was something was wrong with it. So anyway, if you want to check it out, I think one of the things that's useful is we did a huge amount of thinking about when you map, you have to decide what you're going to include and what you're not going to include. So, you know, this whole sticky, this messy question of exactly what is the boundary of solidarity economy. We spent endless hours working through that, and couldn't answer a lot of questions. And so for the map, we said we're going to exclude that unless we know that that is an example to opt in. So you will see, if you get on that, it's just is it solidarityeconomy.us, I think. You'll see some of the definition and what we included and what we didn't include. So for example, we did not include producer co-ops, right? It seems like a no-brainer. And insofar as there's a whole bunch of producers coming together and running, collectively owning and running something, right? It seems like a no-brainer. We just were uncomfortable with some of the big producer co-ops. We don't know much about them. It's like Ocean Spray and Land O'Lakes and I don't know, a whole bunch, right? They're farms that come together and they do something jointly. They do marketing together, or they do processing, food processing together. but we don't know anything about those farms or how they treat their workers or what their, if the farms are sustainable, or we don't know anything about it. We didn't have the capacity to do any kind of research. So we left it off. I think by and large, we left off fair trade, which, like, how can you leave off fair trade? But, Walmart has its own fair trade brand, right? And the ones that we opted in are like Equal Exchange, which is actually a worker cooperative that engages in fair trade, right? So even fair trade outfits that that aggregate fair trade products and then distribute it, if it's a capitalist business, then it's not really, right? So there's so much there. When you're doing your mapping, I don't know if you've established your parameters. It can get really sticky. It can get really mind-bending. You can get really tired of all the like gray areas. Yeah, that's just the reality of it. And hopefully you have a group working through that kind of likes to dig into these. Well, what about this? And what about that? But that's kind of what it takes. So that's a national map. The Massachusetts map is definitely piggybacking on the national one. So there are there's so much more data on solidarity economy in Massachusetts that is not in the big database of the national map. So we're working on filling in the blanks. And also there's a lot of interest in two things. One is stories, right? So collecting stories, and it probably will be maybe a link to like a story map kind of thing. I don't know that we have the capacity to put all the story data in the same database container, but somehow we're starting to collect those stories. And the other thing, which always was an intent of the national map, was to try to build or to support the building of value chains. So I don't know if you talk about that already, but you all know what a supply chain is, right? A supply chain is connecting up the suppliers with the producers. So a value chain is broader. It's thinking about, well, where are you getting your finances and where are you selling and who are you hiring and how are you interacting, partnering with the community, et cetera. So it's just a lot broader. So thinking about how do we develop solidarity economy value chains has always been part of the intent of the mapping, that in order to know who you can connect with, it's really useful to know who's out there. So we certainly in Massachusetts, we're moving ahead on sort of smaller scale piloting. How do we do that? How do we make the potential of value chains more explicit, or even suggest to sort of potential value chains? Yeah.
Thank you. That's great, and good things for us to look out for, since we're just at the beginning of this.
Yeah.
Great. Well, should we leave it at that? I mean, I know we're over, and I think everybody wants to get off to their evenings or dinner or whatnot. So, Emily, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, so grateful for the time and kind of reaffirming, right? Like that this is a slow process and we need to take our time with it, and it takes time to build this. So,
and whatever you're doing is great. Like on an individual level and as a group, as a network. So yeah, congratulations to all of you. Thank you so much for having this discussion.
Yeah, well, thank you.
And stay in touch.
We will.
Good. Good. Okay. Have a good evening, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.